There's a specific feeling you get when you rewatch a movie from the 1990s that you haven't seen in a long time. It's not quite nostalgia. It's something stranger than that. It's like finding a photograph of a city that used to exist, the same streets, the same skyline, but a completely different world underneath it all. That's what rewatching Jerry Maguire feels like in 2026, 30 years later. And the crazy thing is, it still works. Released in December of 1996, Jerry Maguire was directed by Cameron Crowe, the same guy who gave us, say, Anything and Almost Famous, and it starred Tom Cruise at what many people consider the peak of his movie star gravitational pull. Alongside him, Renee Zellweger in what was essentially her breakout role, and Cuba Gooding Jr., who walked away from this film with an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor and one of the most imitated movie moments of the entire decade. The film was a massive hit. It earned over $270 million worldwide against a roughly $50 million budget. It received 5 Oscar nominations. It gave us phrases that embedded themselves permanently into the culture. Show me the money. You had me at hello. Help me help you. Lines so overused, they became cliches almost immediately, which is actually a strange kind of compliment. A line has to mean something before it can be worn out. But 30 years on, Jerry Maguire is worth revisiting, not just as a piece of nostalgia, but as a document of a very particular moment in American cinema, American culture, and the very specific kind of movie that Hollywood used to know how to make and largely doesn't anymore. Here's what strikes you immediately when you put this film on today. The world it depicts is deeply, almost defiantly optimistic. Not in a naive way, not in a way that ignores difficulty. Jerry's life falls apart in the first act, but in a way that assumes, at its foundation, that people can change, that doing the right thing is worth something. That sincerity is not embarrassing. Cameron Crowe has always been a filmmaker who wears his emotions on his sleeve, and in 1996, that approach connected with a broad mainstream audience in a way that feels almost inconceivable now. This was a film made for everyone, for couples on date nights and sports fans, and people who wanted to cry a little and laugh a little and leave the theater feeling like something had shifted inside them. It sits comfortably between a romantic comedy, a sports movie, and a genuine character study, and it pulls all 3 of those things off without ever feeling like it's cheating any of them. That kind of movie, mid-budget, star-driven, emotionally earnest, aimed at adults, has nearly vanished from the studio landscape. In 1996, it was simply called a film. Today, it would be called a miracle. There's also something about the texture of the world the film inhabits that feels very far away now. The sports industry it depicts is pre-social media, pre-24-hour sports news cycle. The phone calls are on landlines. The romance unfolds at human speed, through conversation and uncertainty and actual physical proximity. Nobody is performing for an audience that doesn't exist yet. It's a world that had not yet learned to be watched all the time. What actually happens in this movie? Jerry Maguire is a sports agent. Successful, charming, shallow in ways he hasn't yet examined. He works for a large agency. He represents dozens of clients, and by all external measures, he is winning at the game. Then, one night in a hotel room, something cracks open inside him. He writes a mission statement. He calls it The Things We Think and Do Not Say, a document that argues for fewer clients, more personal attention, genuine human relationships over pure profit extraction. He has it printed and distributed to everyone in his office. And then, of course, he gets fired. It's a beautifully constructed setup because it's both completely believable and utterly devastating. Jerry did the right thing, the brave thing, the honest thing, and the institution rejected him immediately. He leaves the office with only one client, a loud, demanding wide receiver named Rod Tidwell, and one colleague who believed in his memo, Dorothy Boyd, a single mother working in accounting who takes a chance on the man behind the words. What follows is simultaneously a story about Jerry rebuilding his career and a story about him rebuilding himself. And the film is smart enough to know that you can't really do one without the other. It's worth pausing here to talk about Tom Cruise, because his work in this film is genuinely underappreciated. There's a version of this role that could have been played purely as charm. Jerry as an unflappable salesman who just needs to find the right clients. Cruise doesn't do that. He lets Jerry be desperate. He lets it be wrong. He lets him be awkward and frightened, and occasionally self-deceiving in ways that are a little painful to watch. The famous "Who's coming with me?" speech near the beginning of the film is a perfect example. Jerry is performing. He knows he's performing. Everyone in the room knows it. And yet, and this is the Cruise magic, you still kind of want to follow him because there's something real underneath the performance, something genuinely at stake. Cruise has always been extraordinarily good at playing competence, but what makes Jerry Maguire special is how willing he was to play incompetence, to play the man behind the mask. By the time Jerry reaches his lowest point, sitting alone in Dorothy's living room, watching her sister's book club stare at him with something between pity and amusement, Cruise makes you feel the weight of everything this man has lost and is only beginning to understand he wanted. And then there is Dorothy. Renee Zellweger plays her with a warmth that never tips in his softness, a romanticism that never loses its practical intelligence. Dorothy read Jerry's memo. She believed in it, but she is not naive about who Jerry actually is versus who his memo suggested he could become. And she keeps those two versions of him carefully separated in her heart for most of the film. What's remarkable about their romance is how unromantic most of it is in the conventional sense. They don't meet cute. They don't have a perfect date. Their relationship forms in the margins, in late-night work calls, in the small negotiations of two adults with responsibilities and histories and reasons to be careful. When they do fall into something real, it happens almost by accident, and then they spend the rest of the film figuring out whether it was supposed to happen at all. The famous ending, "You had me at hello," lands as hard as it does because the film has spent 2 hours earning it. Dorothy has spent 2 hours not saying that. And when she finally does, it doesn't feel like a movie line. It feels like surrender. The good kind. Cuba Gooding Jr. won his Oscar for playing Rod Tidwell. And watching the film now, you understand completely why. Rod is a lot. He is loud and demanding and convinced of his own greatness in ways that are frequently exhausting and occasionally infuriating. He wants Jerry to scream about his value, to fight for his money, to perform a level of enthusiasm that Jerry, the careful professional, is deeply uncomfortable with. But here's what the film does brilliantly. Rod is not wrong. Rod is not the comic relief or the obstacle. Rod is the most emotionally honest character in the entire movie. He knows what he wants: to be seen, to be valued, to provide for his family, to be loved by his wife the way she deserves. His "show me the money" routine is famous, but the scene that matters more is the one late in the film where he tells Jerry about what it means to play with his whole heart. To have the quan, a word he invents for something that encompasses love, respect, community, and money all at once. It's an absurd speech and a completely sincere one, and Gooding plays both registers simultaneously. The relationship between Jerry and Rod, two men who need each other and can't quite admit it, two men who push each other towards something better, is in many ways the beating heart of the film. It's the friendship that forces Jerry to become the man his memo described. There is also a small boy named Ray, Dorothy's son, 6 years old, enormous glasses, an unself-conscious openness about him that is either wonderfully written or wonderfully cast, or probably both. Ray adores Jerry immediately, with the terrifying, unguarded devotion of a child who has decided you are safe. And Jerry, who has spent most of his life in the careful emotional arithmetic of professional relationships, has absolutely no idea what to do with that. The scenes between Cruise and the young Jonathan Lipnicki are some of the most quietly affecting in the film, precisely because they're played small. No grand gestures, just a grown man slowly learning how to be present with a child who has chosen him. Ray represents something the film is really about underneath all the sports deals and romantic tension. He represents the version of life that requires you to actually show up, not to pitch, not to perform, not to deliver a monologue about mission statements, but to sit on the floor and answer questions about the human head and be there in the morning. Jerry can charm anyone, but you cannot charm a 6-year-old into thinking you love them. You either do or you don't. And learning to be the person who does is what the film is actually about. Here's a thing that is strange to say, but true. Jerry Maguire could not be made today. Not exactly, anyway. Not as a studio movie with a film star and a real budget and a wide theatrical release. The mid-budget adult drama. The kind of film that costs between $30 and $80 million. Tells a grown-up story with actual characters and trusts the audience to care about a man's internal life. Has been systematically eliminated from the major studio landscape over the past 20 years. Or replaced it. Franchises, primarily. Sequels. Cinematic universes. Content designed to appeal globally and therefore to nobody in particular. There is still excellent filmmaking happening, obviously. It has largely migrated to streaming, to independent cinema, to limited series. But the experience of going to multiplex on a Friday night in 1996 and having Jerry Maguire be the movie that everyone is talking about, that specific cultural moment is gone. And there's something else missing too, which is harder to name. Jerry Maguire assumes that its audience shares certain values, that personal growth is real, that love requires honesty, that financial ambition without moral accountability is hollow. It doesn't argue for these things. It takes them as given. And in doing so, it addresses itself to a broad, general audience that it assumes exists, an audience that can be moved by the same things, that recognizes the same aspirations. Whether that audience still exists, or whether we have simply splintered into too many different camps to share a movie in the way this film was once shared, is a question worth sitting with. 30 years later, Jerry Maguire is still a very good film. Not a perfect one. It occasionally overreaches, it sentimentalizes at moments where it should probably hold back, and the sports subplot, while entertaining, is somewhat thinner than the romantic story it surrounds. But it is a film made with genuine conviction by people who cared deeply about what they were doing, starring a performer who gave more of himself than the role technically required, surrounding him with actors who more than held their own. More than that, it is a kind of time machine, not to the 90s, not to the fashion or the technology or the cultural specifics, but to a particular disposition toward movie making and toward storytelling. A belief that audiences could be moved by a man's crisis of conscience, that a romantic ending could be earned over 2 hours of actual emotional work, that a story about a sports agent could really be a story about learning to love something other than yourself. "You complete me," Jerry says at the end, which is either the most romantic line in the movie or a deeply codependent declaration, depending on your mood. But the film earns even that, because we have watched this man be incomplete. We have watched him fail at the things he was good at and discover the things he was bad at and begin, slowly, imperfectly, to become something more. That's what the best movies do. They don't just tell you a story. They show you someone becoming. And 30 years on, Jerry Maguire is still doing that. You had it at hello, Jerry. You still do.